Okay.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Chris Dayley. Chris, thanks for joining us all the way from Utah.
Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited.
It's good to have you with us. So, kind of unpack a little bit. Who is Chris Dayley?
Well, I'm kind of an unlikely. My story is an unlikely story. I grew up in Arizona in the Phoenix Valley, and growing up, I was talking to my mom the other day, just about how my career has progressed, and she said, out of all the kids in our family, you're the one I thought least likely to succeed in life because I
Thanks,
was
Mom.
just no, but I get what she's saying. I mean, growing up, I was a video game geek that didn't really do much. I had no interest in school, no interest in a lot of things, and so I didn't really find my passion, my professional passion, until I was in my early 20s. And my first real job that I got was actually selling. I got a sales position at a company that was selling search engine optimization, selling and fulfilling it.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to me. I use Google every day, and search engine optimization is all about getting your website to rank on Google.
Yep.
And I thought, wow, I had no idea how much was going on behind the scenes when I searched for something on Google. So I got really interested. I ended up applying for an internal position at the company that I was at and got it, and spent the next couple years doing search engine optimization, both in-house and in an agency type setting. And search engine optimization is all about driving traffic to your website,
Sure.
all about getting people to find you online. And I loved it, but I encountered a barrier, about a couple years into doing search engine optimization. I sat down in a annual performance review with the CEO and some other people, and I was reviewing how much success we were having on Google. Hey, we tripled our organic traffic in a 9-month period, all these great metrics. And then they started to dig a little bit deeper and said, okay, so what? Okay, so we tripled our organic traffic. What did that do for revenue? And I had no idea.
You said, that's not my job. I'm just the SEO guy.
Right, I just get traffic to the site. But I should have been thinking about that stuff. But so we started to dig in, find out what's happening with all this traffic. Come to find out, most of the traffic wasn't converting. Nothing was happening. And that's very discouraging for somebody that's spent a lot of time getting people to the site.
Sure.
So I started trying to figure out, well, why? Why is this happening? Why is nobody converting? Nobody could answer that question for me at the company I was at. And so I took to my trusty friend Google and discovered the idea of conversion rate optimization, or running A/B tests to figure out if people like one experience over another.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I discovered the career that I'm in. I ended up starting a company a couple years after getting into the industry, and the rest is history from there. But like I said, I mean, it's kind of an unlikely tale of a guy starting a company from being a lazy high school bum.
So how did you get from video game to SEO? I mean, what was kind of the trigger? You walking down the street and some guy walks out the front of the building and says, "Hey, you look like a candidate. Come on in and apply for the job." I mean, how did that even get on your radar?
Yeah, so it's actually an interesting experience. I was at a cousin's house of mine, and one of their cousins was there. So somebody that I'm not technically related to. I don't know
Sure.
what that's called, a second cousin or something, but somebody that I had never seen before. I was unemployed at the time. No, I take that back. I had been working at a commission-only sales job for 2 months. Hadn't made a single sale, so didn't make a dime off of that job. And I was like, this sucks. I need to find something else. So anyways, this second cousin of mine, who I literally have never seen since, but she told me about the company she was working at, which was this agency that did search engine optimization. And I wasn't actually interested in SEO at all. I just thought, oh, it's a sales job and it pays, and so I'll apply. And so it was one of those serendipitous experiences where right place at the right time. There was somebody there that introduced me to a job that I didn't even know anything about, but it turned out it snowballed and led me into the career that I'm in today. And so I'm very grateful. I probably ought to send, some kind of a gift bag to that second cousin
There
of
you
mine
go. I
at
mean,
some
you
point.
never know how serendipity comes into play. I mean, you literally just walking down the street and boom, there was that opportunity. So once you kind of made that transition out of that, that high-paying career field you were in before, the full commission sales with no sales. So once you got in, I mean, was it almost like immediately you thought, "Wow, this is something that I'm good at. This is something I really, have taken to quickly," or was there kind of a steep learning curve? I mean,
There was a steep learning curve. In fact, I remember because doing SEO really well, there's a lot of technical skills and background that I did not
right,
have.
right,
And so, however, what ended up driving me, and this is where, going from lazy video game couch dude to, somewhat successful SEO guy, it started with just a spark of interest. And I think
right.
that's, as I look back on my life, I don't think I was lazy because I had no ambition.
Hmm.
Now, you could argue that I didn't have any ambition at that point. I just hadn't found anything that
Right.
really had sparked my interest and my passion. I went to school, hated school, and at this time, the time that I got into SEO, I was actually going to college for business management, and I was an awful college student as well. I was
Mm.
getting C's and D's, and my parents were really concerned, um, and I ended up dropping out of college, and my dad is a pretty traditional, had a very traditional upbringing. He went to college, got a degree, went and worked for a company for 25 years, and
Yeah.
worked his way up the ladder. And so when I dropped out of college, I think that was very concerning for both of my parents, of going like, "Oh my gosh, he's throwing his life away."
Mm.
But ultimately, once I found that spark of something that was very interesting to me, I was willing to invest
Right.
a lot of time and effort into learning it, even though there was a very steep learning curve, and it did take, I think, probably at least a year for me to feel like I had any kind of real skills in that area.
And that's kind of the typical, like, almost millennial journey,
Sure.
and boomers like myself. I see. I'm a millennial in a boomer suit, so I mean, I'm a little bit of a hybrid misfit. So I understand that journey completely. But there's a lot of us in the boomer range that don't understand that at all, and it drives them crazy. But
Yeah.
it really is kind of the basic ingredient of an entrepreneur.
Yes.
This idea of kind of exploration and testing. And you mentioned something just a minute ago about A/B testing, and I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here with the questions, because I was listening to an interview that you had done, I think maybe as a Facebook Live, that was online, and you mentioned something about this A/B test where the A and the B weren't connected, or I can't remember exactly what the context was, but maybe it's like your first A/B test that you were trying to run, and you were like, I don't remember exactly what the context was, but is that something that you can recall a little bit, or that you don't have any idea what I'm talking about?
Well, I'm not 100% sure if this is the same instance, but I will share. So the first A/B test that I ran, this is while I was still doing SEO. I was trying to figure out just how do I figure out how to convert this traffic.
Uh huh.
And so, of course, I had no clue what I was doing. I had never run an A/B test before, and nobody at the company that I was at had ever done it either. And
Or
so,
even heard of it, for that matter,
or
probably.
heard of it,
That's
yeah.
right.
And so I built my first test. So I actually used a tool called Unbounce. It's a landing page tool. So I kind of hacked this tool. It's normally just to like build out and test landing pages, but I thought, hey, I bet I could test a page on our site using this tool too. So I took one of the pages that one of our designers, who was very proud of his design, by the way, had spent a lot of time designing this very nice, beautiful page, and I tested an Unbounce landing page template against this other page. Um, Of course, I tweaked the copy, I sort of tweaked the design, but I wasn't a designer, so the page looked awful. And when our designer saw it, he hated it and forbid me from running the test. Even if that test wins, we're not putting that on the site. And so I thought, well, I don't care. Let's just see what happens. So I ran the test and ended up winning. And that is actually what that test alone intrigued me so much that that's what led to me leaving my career in the SEO field and transitioning into what I do now, which is conversion rate optimization, because I looked at these two pages and thought, why would this work? Like, it doesn't look better. I clearly have no clue what I'm doing. Why did this work? What was it about this new page that was more appealing to visitors? And honestly, that is the question that has driven me to this day. One of the things that gets me excited in the morning to get up, right, is what am I going to find today? What is going to be surprising to me today? Human behavior is just so fascinating because there's not any hard, fast rules that you can rely on.
Sure.
And so it was a very surprising test for me and catapulted me into another
journey
change. Yeah.
Let me ask you that sparks a question about A/B testing. So I understand the basic premise of A/B testing, where you're literally just, looking at your audience and asking them, preferences, and is one more clear than the other? Does one speak, to you from an emotional standpoint, whatever the preference is? But how do you then reverse engineer on the backside that says, well, why did they choose that?
Yeah.
So what's the I guess the back end feedback or insights? How do you gather that information? I mean, is that also part of the test? Which one do you prefer and why? I mean,
yeah. So that's a great question. So I'll take a step back and talk about how I discovered how to run a really effective test, because the problem with my first test that I ran, so it worked, but I changed so many things on the page all at once.
Yeah.
So, I was testing a completely different design against a completely different design. And when you have two completely different designs, it's basically impossible to determine why did this work, right? Now, the fact that it worked better said there's something in there that users like better, but it's impossible to tell why. And so I've developed a process over the last 6 years just by running a lot of tests that kind of helps me distill down a test into specific actionable takeaways. And so the way that I do that is every test that I run now starts with a business question. So I don't actually start with like, here's what the new page is going to look like. I start with a question that I would like to answer. And so that question might be something like, what headline will resonate best with people? We'll just take a very basic test concept. What headline will resonate best with people? That's the question. Then we dive into a hypothesis. Okay, we want to figure out just the headline. So we're isolating one specific thing on the page, which helps us to cancel out a lot of noise. Because when you're changing a whole design, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of things that are happening, and not everything is going to be influencing people. So if we focus on one isolated element, headline alone, then we ask, what can we change here on this headline that might influence people? So I might have a hypothesis that, our headline right now says, I'll take disruptive advertising as an example. Our headline right now says something like, the most innovative marketing on the planet, right? Let's say that we have a headline that says something like that. Then my hypothesis might be, well, that's just marketing fluff. That doesn't say anything about what we actually do. So let's test a headline where we say what we do. Managing PPC and conversion rate optimization services for businesses. Well, that's kind of boring. So now let's create another version. That kind of mixes some marketing fluff and some specifics of what we do. So we say the most innovative PPC and conversion rate optimization services on the planet. Right? And so what we're doing here is we're taking some different approaches. This is what most businesses do not do, and why I think that a lot of companies struggle when it comes to their website is when most companies think about their website design, It's just this thing out there that somebody's going to make look nice for me, right? So when most companies approach their website design, they'll either say, let's hire a great designer or a great design agency that will design something that looks nice for me.
Yep.
And then they launch it, and if it works, then great. If it doesn't work, then I guess we need to redesign the whole thing
Right.
again. Or companies will go and say, let's find our biggest competitor, because whatever they're doing must be working, and let's just copy them.
Sure.
Um,
The path of
and
least
so,
resistance.
yeah, right. It's a very easy approach to take, and frankly, I mean, it's not the worst approach to take for creating a new website. But the challenge is, again, like you said, if it works, you have no clue why.
Right.
Like, why did it work? I don't know,
Right.
because our competitors did it and it worked.
Right.
Why did it work? Well, because it looked nice, obviously.
Mhm.
But there's no specific takeaways. And so that's why, going back to this concept of A/B testing with a business question in mind, we want to learn one thing at a time. This can help you understand your audience. And so if I run these two different headline tests, my original headline is marketing fluff. My B version is very dry, basic description of what we do, and
Right.
version C is marketing fluff and
Right.
explanation combined. If version B wins, the one that's just dry, basic, boring explanation, I've just learned something about my audience.
Yep.
I've just learned they don't like the marketing fluff.
Yep.
They want just a to-the-point explanation because they don't want to have to figure out. They don't want to have to read between the lines, for
But
example.
that's only true if you kind of have a control group or I guess a credible base
Yes.
of audience or whatever. So as you're doing these tests, how do you kind of control that group that says, okay, A, B, and C all got the same fair viewing at the same times for the
Yeah.
same length of time, same time of year, that type of
Yep.
thing. Versus, I mean, because we know all those things come into play
Right.
will be a variant in web traffic or whatever.
Yes.
So how do you are they run simultaneously or are they run like consecutively or how does
Yeah,
that
great
normally happen?
question. Great question. So again, I'll tell you first what most businesses do that does not actually work. But when I ask companies like, have you ever done A/B testing? Almost always people will say, yeah, I've done A/B testing before. And I'll say, well, tell me about it. What test did you run? Well, we redesigned our whole site and we launched our site on a Monday and we compared our conversion rates to the previous Monday and they went up. So the new
Yeah.
site worked.
Yeah.
And like you said, that does not hold true because there's so many factors at play this Monday versus last Monday.
Yeah.
Like you had mentioned, you're just about to get hit with a hurricane,
Yeah.
right? So all of North and South Carolina are, or maybe not all of them, but a lot of people are being evacuated from their homes, taking
Right.
shelter. So guess what? A lot of people are not going into work today. Guess what else? A lot of people probably are not going to be shopping today. Or maybe a lot of people will be shopping because they're stuck at some high school taking shelter and they want to get on their phone and just do
And
something
that's
to
all they've got
distract
is their
themselves.
phone. That's right.
Right. And so maybe my conversion rates go way up today, but maybe it's not because I have a new website. Maybe
Yep.
it's because a hurricane is hitting and a lot of my customers are from North and South Carolina and people are just on their
Yep.
phones more than usual. So what we do, so that's the approach that doesn't work. And a lot of businesses do that and it doesn't work because there's just too many factors at play.
Yeah.
What we do is, you mentioned, do we run them simultaneously? Yes. So we use testing software. There's a lot of A/B testing software out there. VWO is the one that we use most often, Visual Website Optimizer. There's things like Optimizely. Adobe has a tool called Target. Google actually has a free tool called Google Optimize you can use. And what these tools do is they allow you to say, okay, our control is our existing site. Now let's create a duplicate of our control of our existing website, and then let's change something. So let's
Right.
change the headline. We can create as many of those duplicates as we want. And then what the tool does is it will say when somebody comes to our homepage, we will randomly show them one of the three experiences that there are.
Yep.
So they'll either get our existing site or they'll get one of the other two. And so that allows us to get a random sampling of the population, right? So that we're not picking and saying,
Sure.
hey, we'll show our best demographic, our test version and show our worst demographic, our existing site, so
Yeah.
we can control the outcome.
Right. Yeah. I know which
It's
one I
just,
want to win, so I'm going to
yeah,
put that
right.
in the
Let's
best
just show that
position.
one. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it's totally random, and then we're going to run this over a period of time. And I always run tests in periods of a week at a time. So
Mm.
Monday to a Monday, or if it's 2 to 3 weeks that we're going to take, we're going to go Monday through 2 weeks, the following Monday, so that we're getting an entire week sampling in there. Because that's another thing that businesses will
Yep.
do is they'll take a business week, Monday through Friday, and call a test on a Friday. But the challenge with that again is your weekend traffic is probably going to behave very differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Because people aren't at work or
Right.
whatever. People behave differently at work. So
Right.
great question. That's a super important part of A/B testing.
And I like the idea you touched on, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it almost seems like that it's not only you have to control the group, you got to control the number of variables you change. So if you just change one thing at a time, there's one variable that you're changing, it's a lot easier to measure than if you, like you said, if you completely change the page and okay, people like the new page versus the old page, but why? What is it
Yeah.
about the new page? I have no idea, because it has 15 different elements that you change. You change the color, you change the image, you change the type
Yes.
font, you change the flash, whatever shows up. I mean, everything that was different, so it was like a completely different experience. And
Yeah.
they may have liked it, and could have even liked it for the wrong reasons. I liked
Right.
it because it was pretty. I didn't like it because
Yep.
it was utilitarian. I liked it because it was pretty. But it's not going to convert any better. I just liked it better. I'm going to stay on
Well,
there because you have puppy pictures, or something. So
exactly. And let me just share a story. This is actually one of the very exciting experiences I had in my career. So we had a client that came to us that had spent about $350,000 on a new site design. And they had based their entire site design off of a concept, which was, we get a lot of traffic from Instagram, so let's design our new site to look kind of like Instagram. So on mobile, you'll scroll and scroll and scroll, and there's just products. I mean, this client sold a lot of different types of products,
Yep.
so let's just give them tons of selections, right? The idea makes sense, except that the two don't actually follow, right? This is like a slippery slope. Like, because people want one thing, they also want this other thing.
exactly.
Because people are coming from Instagram, they want something that looks like Instagram. So they spend a bunch of money on this new site design, and they launch it, and nothing happens. Conversion rates don't go up, they don't go down, they don't generate more revenue or less. So, I mean, it's not the worst case scenario, but it's a pretty bad scenario when you spent that much
Yep.
money on site design,
Yep.
right?
Because it's not neutral. You've lost
Right.
$350,000.
Exactly. And so then they want to go, well, why did this happen? We have this completely new design. Something should have happened.
Yeah.
And so one of the first things that we did is we wanted to figure out, well, what do people actually want on the site? Do they want all of these options or not? That's the first question that we asked. Specifically on the homepage, when somebody comes to your homepage, do they want a lot of products or not? It's a very basic business question.
Yeah.
So what we did was we created 8 different versions of their homepage, and we systematically removed sections of products. So some of our variations had very few products, some of them had more. We just had a bunch of different options. Out of those 8 different versions of their homepage, 6 of them increased conversion rates, and we increased revenue by like $25,000 in 1 week just from removing stuff from the site. And so again, what this did is it started to open up our minds and say, okay, well, now we've found one thing. We found that customers don't want a lot of products.
Right.
So the next logical step is, okay, well, if they don't want a lot, then which products do they want? Right now, it starts to lead us down this very logical and very data-driven rabbit hole of finding out what our customers actually want. But when you do a whole site redesign and it's like flat, it's like,
Yep.
well, do they hate the new design? Or maybe they really like some aspects and they hate other aspects. Right. Let's start to dig in and figure out.
I mean, I love what you're, and I want to kind of circle back and kind of shift the focus here a little bit and just really drill down a little more into Chris Dayley. But one thing that you mentioned about that early is, when you said you had your kind of your performance review at your first company. And so what's interesting is that I really love the idea of focusing on conversion versus like just traffic.
Hmm.
because to me, conversion is a that's a revenue metric.
Yes.
Traffic is more of a vanity metric.
Yep.
It's like, I have 500,000 followers on Instagram, but I'm making $10 a month, or something like that.
Yep.
Versus I have 5,000 followers on Instagram, but they are raving fans, and I'm making
Yes.
30 grand a month, based or whatever it is. So, I mean, I really appreciate the shift that you talked about, and that's not only true in what you're doing, but also I think is very true in virtually anything that our audience would be involved in. Is what are the activities that are going to drive revenue versus just drive activity or noise.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so let's touch on that just a little bit. So when you shifted, like this company example you just gave, spent 350,000 on the website, came to you guys and you guys said, hey, let's do some testing. That was an easy invoice. If I'm that company, that's an easy invoice for me to receive. If you send it to me and say, hey, we kicked up your conversion by 15% or whatever, because
Yep.
we drilled down and figured out exactly what your customers want.
Yep.
So what was the response? I mean, the company had to be thrilled.
Oh, they are thrilled, and they're still a client. Actually, they've been a client for about a year and a half now, and so that's been one of the great. We've got quite a few clients like that, and that kind of brings me back to one of the things that I have fallen in love with about what I do now is it allows me to build what we call disruptive results-based relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we because if you have a relationship with a client, whether it is an agency relationship or whether you have a customer that's buying products from you or whatever it is, um, just having a relationship with someone alone um, is great, but that's not going to guarantee that they're going to stay a
Right.
customer.
Right.
Just having results alone without a great
Right.
relationship doesn't guarantee. I mean, we've had a lot of clients that have stopped working with us when we've generated great results because they don't have any kind of real connection with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Um,
It's just
and
more
so
transactional.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so kind of that intersection between results and relationships, to me is what gets me really excited every day. And so, yeah, I mean, when we have that in place, when we have, in fact, I'll tell you a story about a great relationship that came about, a great results-based relationship that came about. This kind of goes back to this whole serendipity thing of being in the right place at the right time. But so I went on a podcast probably 3 or 4 years ago
Mm-hmm.
that I had never heard of before. This is when I had very first started my company. My first company is called Dayley Conversion, and I was trying to figure out how do I get new clients. And I mean, that's the first question that most entrepreneurs are going
Right.
to ask themselves is like, well, how do I make money? And so one pathway to getting in front of a lot of people was speaking at conferences. It was like, okay, well, I need to speak at a conference. So I submitted a pitch to speak at a conference. The guy who ran the conference responded and said, well, first you got to be on my podcast. So I went on his podcast almost like begrudgingly, like, okay, fine. If that's what I have to do to get to your conference, then I'll do it. So I went on his podcast. After the conversation, he said, I think what you do is very interesting. I don't think it's the right fit for my conference.
Mm.
And so I felt like it was a total waste of
Yeah.
time. I just had totally I had this very selfish mentality of what's in it for me. So 2 months go by, and then out of the blue, Michael Stelzner, who owns Social
Yeah.
Media Examiner,
Yeah.
reaches out and he said, "Hey, I heard you on this podcast," and I was like, "What? People actually listen to that podcast?" He said, "I heard you on this podcast, and I was very interested in what you do. Um, I'd love to chat." So we jumped on a call, and he said, "I would love." He's like, "I'm fascinated in A/B testing. I'd love to work with you. What can I do for you in return?" And I'm like, well, working with me alone is doing something for me. And Mike Stelzner is now a very good friend of mine. But I was just blown away. I'm like, well, what can you do for me? I don't know. And he said, well, it seems like you're interested in speaking at conferences. I speak a lot.
Yeah.
I'd
He
love to
does.
coach you. And so he kind of took me on as a speaking protege, which was very gracious of him, and I'm still grateful to him to this day. But so first, I was on this podcast. I didn't think anything was going to come of it. I started out with this very selfish perspective. Now I'm interacting with this very selfless guy.
Yeah.
Who is really just trying to help me out and is also helping himself out by learning about A/B testing. So we started running a couple tests on Social Media Examiner, saw tremendous success, and then he said, "Hey, I'd love to have you come on my podcast to discuss these tests."
That's
So
a
I
game
jumped
changer.
on. Oh yeah,
That's
I mean,
a
because
game changer.
he has a huge following there. And then after the podcast, he said, I'm really loving this, this kind of results relationship. Would you present on some of this at my conference at Social Media Marketing World?"
You
So
said,
of
no, I'm holding
course,
out for this other guy's conference.
right. So I said, of course. So I went and spoke. This was 2 years ago, 2017. Not 2 years ago, a year ago, 2017's conference. That was my first year speaking at Social Media Marketing World. So I went and spoke, and after I had spoken, I think it was actually a day later. I spoke on the first day because I did a 90-minute workshop. I bumped into, just in the halls, I bumped into somebody that had been in my session, and he said, "Hey, that was some pretty cool stuff that you presented on. I'd love to talk more." So I said, "Of course, I'd love to chat." And it led to this business relationship. And this a totally separate company. They've now been a client for, we're going on 2 years here.
Wow.
And we've become a real strategic partner for their business, almost to the point where they almost don't want to do anything without testing it first.
Yeah.
But it all, if I go back, it all started out with a relationship with Mike Stelzner that he approached from a very selfless perspective.
Yep.
And that led into what has now turned into several business relationships that are very close friends of mine to this day. But so this has been something that's been like a major mental shift for me, is getting out of this like what's in it for me perspective.
Sure.
And going into relationships with, let's figure out how we can help each other out. Like what can I do for you? What can you, like, instead of what can you do for me, how can I help you? Those are the business relationships that become the best for me and have also resulted in the longest lasting client relationships.
And I think people can see through that. I really do. I think, people aren't stupid. I mean, there's a moment when you're in a relationship, you're in a dialogue, and you're going, this guy is just looking past me. We're talking, but we're not really conversing.
Connecting.
We're not connecting here. So let's take a little shift here, and I want to drill a little bit down on the business side of things. So, I mean, it sounds like all rainbows and ponies, or rainbows and unicorns or whatever, as the saying goes so far. But tell me, what would you say would be like one or two pain points that you struggle with daily, just in running disruptive advertising? What are a couple of obstacles that you think come up on a fairly regular basis that you just continually say, I just keep running into these hurdles?
Yeah. So, and there's a couple, and they have changed over time.
Sure.
We talk a lot about here. There's this kind of idea in your head, and whether it's you're starting a business and you think, well, when I make this much revenue, then I'll have it made.
Right.
Like, then life will get easy. Or if you're working at a full-time job, it's like, once I get this promotion, or once I'm making this much, or whatever it is, it's like you have this idea that things will get easy at a certain point. And the truth is, if you're really progressing as an individual, things should never get easy.
Yeah.
Because challenges are, I feel like, what really propel us into growth. What led to my career change that has now become probably the best business decision I've ever made was I was driving a bunch of traffic and it wasn't converting. Like, that's a major problem. So anyways, to answer your question directly, when I first started my company, some of my first challenges were because I was running an agency that was largely based on my expertise. I could not step away from the business.
Yeah.
Like, I was the only cog that was running my business, right? And so I remember actually an experience that I should remember with fondness, but I just remember some of the struggles. So I went on a trip with my wife to Hawaii, and while I'm in Hawaii, I remember being on the beach in Hawaii, getting a call from an upset customer because something wasn't going right. And I was sitting there on the beach trying to figure things out for like an hour or two. And and of course I could have still really enjoyed that trip, but I was so frustrated by that. I'm like,
Yeah.
here I am on vacation. I can't even enjoy my vacation. This sucks. And so, like my first challenge was, how do I replace myself essentially? How do I
Yeah.
build a business where I am not the only cog? Um, and that took a long time to really figure out. I mean,
Mm.
it's a lot of business owners never get to that point.
Yep.
Um, and and that's kind of what led to one of my decisions, which was to merge my company with Disruptive Advertising, because I had really figured some business things out. Disruptive Advertising had
Yeah.
figured some
Exactly.
things out really well, and so we were able to kind of fuse together and and elevate. And both of our companies were elevated as a result.
It kind of sounds like the E Myth.
Yes,
The
that's
boogie myth.
exactly
I
what
mean,
it
it's
is.
it's like, how do you work on your business instead of in it? The whole
Exactly.
basic concept. So
I was your classic E-Myth entrepreneur. I had technical expertise and I had no clue about starting a business.
hmm.
Like I shouldn't have started a business in the first place. Like I shouldn't have, because I didn't have any idea what I was getting into.
Hey,
Um,
sometimes that's the best way, because I mean, you were obviously, even though you were in struggle mode, you were also in learning mode.
right,
So I
exactly.
mean, that prepared you to, to bring your skill set and your expertise to the table with disruptive advertising. So that's probably what's created this good partnership, that
Yes.
you formed there at the company. So let me go ahead. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was just gonna say, but that challenge has kind of changed over time. So as I've built in some redundancy, for lack of a better term,
Hmm.
or taken most of the actual day-to-day fulfillment off of my plate, we've now, now there's a challenge that I face on a daily basis, which is now that I'm not involved really on a day-to-day basis, how do we maintain the quality
Yeah.
and the expertise and the experience that people were getting when they were working with me
Yeah.
now that they're not? And so that's a constant struggle, is how do we scale and
Mm.
maintain the quality that we have without, because I mean, anytime you scale, you're bringing on additional people, and you're going to lose some of that immediate expertise. And so that's been a struggle that we continue to work on, figuring out how to solve.
That is a great question, and I mean the the E Myth. Michael Gerber, he talks about, well, work on your business, not in it. Well, the basic assumption is that you can multiply yourself, that you
Yeah.
can, but that's much easier said than done, because I
Yes.
mean it's not just it's nature and nurture. It's not just the way you were created, but it's also the way, the things you've learned and the experiences you've had, and the
Hmm.
the failures and everything together in this mosaic, of
Yeah.
this is who Chris Daly is. This is because he's made up of a million different pieces, all put together to form a nice puzzle there. But I
Right.
love that. I mean, that's a great question. I'm really anxious to see what, our listeners, from their expertise, how they can speak into that particular pain point. So let's transition just a little bit about, getting really inside your head here, and tell me, other than, I mean, this may be your answer, Michael Stelzer may be your answer, but who online really inspires you? If you had to pick one person, give me one line of why.
So one person that I am continually inspired by is Tim Ferriss.
Mm,
So
yeah,
I love Tim Ferriss because he is a constant. He's a human
he
experimenter.
is
He's somebody
certainly.
that is, and I would call him like a personal. He's like a personal improvement guru.
Hmm.
And I love his approach to constantly learning and developing, and trying to make his life more efficient and productive.
I sent my wife an email today that had a quote that was off of, he does kind of his Friday five email list or whatever, the five things he's working on. And it was interesting that you had suggested him, because I read that earlier today, and sent her a quote that he said, this is the quote I'm pondering right now. So yeah, I
Love
fully
that.
understand. Speaking of quote, is there a life quote that really drives you, that you got, taped up by your laptop there? And
Yes, there's one that I review on an almost daily basis, and that is, To reach a goal you've never before reached, you must do things you've never before done. And that's something that continues to inspire me. Like I said, um, as you push into the unknown, like every time you encounter some new challenge in your life, um, it's an opportunity to either grow or shrivel
Mm.
up and isolate and shy away from it. And so to me, that helps me to remember when I have these challenges where it's like, I don't know what to do. I feel really frustrated. I don't know what to do. I've been sitting here staring at this screen for this whole week and I still don't know what to do about this. It helps me keep in perspective, and this is helping me accomplish some that I've never accomplished before. I've never done this thing before. I don't know how to do it, and part of the joy in this journey is figuring this out.
Mm. Is that an original quote, or is that from someone?
It's from someone. I'm trying to remember. I don't. I think actually Neil Maxwell, I believe, is who said that.
Well, I can certainly look it up. I want to make sure that if this is in the show notes that we've given credit where credit's due. So
That's great.
yeah, if there's one piece of advice that you could give yourself, your pre-startup self, if you go back to right before you started your own kind of SEO company, what would it be, and what do you think would have made all the difference in the time between now and then?
So the advice I would have given myself is stop playing video games. And this honestly, this kind of goes back to the quote that I just shared. You must do things you've never before done. So um, it sounds funny, but for a long time, for the first few years of my career and of starting my company, I had a really hard time just with uncomfortable situations.
Hmm.
Um, and for any entrepreneur that start a business, there's a lot of them.
Yep.
Like starting a business and being an entrepreneur is sometimes a very lonely and challenging place to be.
Yep.
And instead of being okay with those situations, I would kind of self-medicate through things like video games that
Hmm.
were really just a way of me trying to escape and
Sure.
and really just a waste of time. Now, I mean, that's not to say that I think video games are a complete waste of time, because I still enjoy sitting down occasionally to play video games, but I spent so much time doing that. I spent, hours per day playing a game on my phone or whatever,
Yep.
and it was just a huge distraction from and so I feel like I could have been so much more productive. And so now I actually have some boundaries for myself in place, and I've actually written these out. I've committed to people around this where it's like, I will not play video games until I've taken care of everything else that I need to take care of in a day,
Hmm.
until I feel like I'm not using a video game to run and hide from a challenge in my life. Um, and I have a list of things that I've committed to myself that I'll do every day to be responsible for myself, be responsible as a father and as a husband and as an employer. Until I've finished all of those things, I will not play video games. So what that's led to is I play video games maybe twice a month now,
Yep.
and when I do, I actually enjoy them a lot more
Sure.
because I'm not using it to run away from challenges in my life.
All
So
right.
that's my advice I'd give to
I
myself.
love the way you unpack that. But as you were talking, I'm thinking of that poor, that young kid that plays Fortnite and, makes 500,000 a month or whatever, some
Sure,
ridiculous.
yeah,
So, yeah, there are always exceptions to the rules. But
right.
well, Chris, it has truly been a pleasure to talk to you today, and I could just leave this thing running all day long and just continue to ask you questions and pick your brain, because I mean you really are a wealth of information. I think it's very interesting to our listeners here at Rising Tide. But I just want anything else that you just want to that I haven't asked you about. You just want to wrap up with, and then tell people how they can find you online.
Yeah, so I get a lot of the questions that you asked today are questions that I get fairly often about, specifically about A/B testing.
Hmm.
So we actually put together a guide, like a starter guide, an A/B testing starter guide, for people that are interested in the concept of A/B testing and have never done it before, or maybe interested in how to do it a little bit better. We put together a free guide that the listeners can download at disruptiveadvertising.com/guide. And like I said, that's a free download. If you are interested in talking to someone at Disruptive, there's a little box you can check that says, yes, I'm interested. If you just want the guide, you can download that and just don't check the box and we won't harass you.
Hey man, that is great, and I will be on that right after we get off the call here. So make sure
Great.
that will also be listed in the show notes when the episode goes live. And but Chris, thanks again for just taking the time today, and just like I said, really just kind of unpacking a lot of things that are so pertinent and so germane to the kind of the entrepreneurial journey. And it's great hearing your story, and I loved kind of the way you kind of added some meat to the bones, and you know, everything that you mentioned, there was a story behind it that kind of led you to that point. And that, to me, that's where, you know, the information becomes interesting, is when you really have added that extra, you know, kind of oomph behind the things that you were saying. And I just appreciate you taking the time today and just helping, like we say, all boats rise in a rising tide. Chris, thanks again.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.